Good morning on the West Coast, good afternoon on the East Coast, and happy days everywhere in between. Today is Wednesday, March 20th, and as I always say, it's a beautiful day to have a webinar. I'm John Yerington, CEO of the Performance Marketing Institute, a 501c6 not-for-profit trade association dedicated to protecting, promoting, and advancing the direct-to-consumer and performance-driven marketing industries. And on behalf of the entire PDMI family, it's my pleasure to welcome you back to yet another fun-filled and exciting episode of the PDMI Take 20. As a reminder, the PDMI Take 20 is a quick hitting roundtable discussion led by industry experts on trending topics all in 20-ish minutes. Today, we're joined by sports and entertainment marketing guru, Michael Brinkman of Digital Ticket and Full House Solutions. And together, we'll be discussing the latest challenges and opportunities in the sports marketing arena. However, before we get started, please allow me to do a little housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question and we encourage you to do so, please use your questions tab located in the control panel. Also, please note, you're welcome to ask questions throughout today's conversation, but we will hold all replies to the end of today's discussion. Alrighty, folks, with that said, it's my pleasure to welcome today's moderator. His tears can cure cancer. Too bad he never cries. He's the fearless Chris Foster. Chris is Vice President of New Business at Modern Postcard, a direct marketing agency located in Carlsbad, California. In addition to his day job, Chris teaches brand strategies at UCSD Extension courses, and he's the chairperson of the PDMI Brand Response Council. As always, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. And for the 86th time, because today is the 86th episode, take it away, my friend. Take it away.
You got it, Johnny. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And welcome Michael Brinkman into the Take 20. It's his first time here, hopefully not his last. We are absolutely talking about performance marketing in sports and entertainment. And in a lot of the conversations that we've had, especially when we have guests from media companies, or we talk about streaming services like NBC, Paramount, Peacock, CBS, and more, conversations always talk about content, right? The streaming services that have the best content is going to win. But here's what's interesting. What we find is that the highest watched viewing event has always been, and will actually probably continue to be, live sports. There's nothing like it. You can't predict it. You don't know what's going to happen. People are watching all in that moment, and it's a shared communal event. So the World Cup, for example, boasted 5 billion viewers. That's about half the planet watched that thing. The Summer Games are looking at about 2 billion viewers. And there's a small niche sporting event from the National Football League. It's called the Super Bowl. They had 124 million, a measly 124 million viewers. It was the most watched program ever in the history of the US. So clearly live sports and sports in general are something that is so important to not only performance marketers and brand advertisers and media companies, but also to the country. But it's not just about device viewership. It's also about getting people in the seats. It's about sponsorships. It's about season tickets. It's club seating. It's vendor relationships. It's fan engagement. It's about performance. And the performance of the marketing and sales teams need to be really strong and effective, and even more strong and effective than the performance on the field, especially if a team is struggling. So we've got an expert, right, in terms of marketing and sales with experience in digital selling, training, and marketing. So Michael Brinkman's got a high-level view of the industry and also some hand-on stories. So he's going to help us as performance marketers learn what this key industry in sports and entertainment is doing well and doing poorly, and what the future looks like for the upcoming year. And I couldn't move on to Michael without giving a shout out first to number 86, Hines Ward of the beloved Pittsburgh Steelers. As in episode 86, this is dedicated to you, Hines Ward, number 86 in my heart. Okay, so Michael, you recently attended an event called the National Sports Forum, and this is a singular event of its kind, where marketing, sales, and business leaders from all the major sports teams and all the major leagues come together once a year to talk shop, share stories, and learn from one another. So I'll ask you, as going there and kind of being our eyes and ears to the National Sports Forum, what 3 salient topics stood out to you?
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. This will be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And as you were saying, episode 86, I was actually thinking Hines Ward too. I was waiting for you to do that call out. So yes, so thanks for having me. Ironically enough, yeah, the National Sports Forum this year happened just a few weeks ago in Pittsburgh. And as being a Vikings fan myself, I wasn't exactly sure what to do when I was standing next to all those Super Bowl trophies. I haven't seen that many in my lifetime before. So, but the city of Pittsburgh was just amazing. Great host, great venues. We toured the Pirates ballpark, which obviously has great views of the downtown skyline and also the Steelers stadium. So what's amazing about the National Sports Forum is I think it's almost in its 30th year. I think this was maybe 28 or somewhere around there. And Ron Sieber, when he started that, I think he was going to be close to being divorced because he had nobody showing up at the time, and his wife was wondering what he was doing, and it just wasn't making sense. But fast forward 20 some years later, and he had over 1,000 people there, both from the team side as well as the vendor side. And it was just amazing. It's one of the things where, Ron over the years has really kind of portrayed it as a family style conference. And it's, he basically says, if you don't have a job, keep your friends in mind there and help each other out is one of the kind of cool things. So it becomes kind of this more friendship style networking type of conference, which I find very interesting and worthwhile for me. But getting back to your question, Chris, I don't know if AI is an answer to that or a possibility, but that would be one answer. But we'll get to that maybe in a second. I would say one of the other interesting things that stood out to me, and kind of like what you were talking about with the viewership, is the continued rise of women's sports. We just continue hearing more and more about that these days. And, again, being from Minnesota here locally, we had the Big Ten women's tournament here 2 weeks ago, and it was completely sold out in an NBA building. So 20,000 fans for every single game of that tournament. Now, granted, a lot of them were there from Iowa that drove up to see Caitlin Clark play. But just the ability for the women's sports to have the viewership and the ticket sales and the sponsorship revenue that it's now seeing, I think that's going to really bolster that in the years ahead. The women's soccer team at the U.S. level, obviously. I also went here in Minnesota. We had the PWHL, the Women's Hockey League. We had the largest attendance at 13,300. But since that time, it's already been passed twice. So there's been a bigger crowd in Canada, and there's been a bigger crowd now in the United States. So seeing full buildings for hockey as well, especially in the Midwest and the East, taking place is just kind of showing that that's something to definitely keep an eye on.
What's interesting about that, I just read an article. I know it comes back to Pittsburgh, it always does, but the PPG Arena hosted Ottawa and I think Toronto women's league, women's professional teams there, sold out, absolutely sold out, and it was even in a different city. So Pittsburgh, I think, wants to get a team going. But to your point about the rise of the popularity of women's sports, I know that San Diego recently, last year, got San Diego waived for women's professional soccer here in San Diego, and every game was sold out.
Yes. Yeah, and it's across the country. I mean, it's just amazing that it's finally reached that point where, again, brands are getting on board, and that's what's kind of helping out is brands are jumping in and being a part of that success and that popularity, and then from there, the player salaries start to increase, the ticket sales increase, and everything kind of starts to follow and line up from there.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. That's a wonderful lesson, and it's the only place where you can get that kind of information. And when you say when the brands get on board, what's interesting about that is that probably bleeds over then into sponsorship and engagement. How do you see that changing over the next year or so?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, that's what I was also going to say at the National Sports Forum is sponsorship measurement is also another obviously key category that was talked about out there. And there's a lot of businesses out there that do a great job of kind of measuring that sponsorship and deciding, was it effective or how effective was it? What does that look like? And obviously there's a lot of ways to do that. Part of it, obviously, as we all say as marketers, is brand awareness and just kind of being out there and being present, being a part of some of these popular movements and events that are taking place. But besides that, from like a sports team and a league perspective, like it's up to the league and the team itself to find something that helps that brand internally. And what I mean by that is, like, it could be something as simple as, like, if you as a brand are having a hard time retaining employees or hiring new employees, that can be something you can actually go to a sports team and try to do. That awareness in front of all their fans. How do you get in front of all those fans and tell them that, hey, this is a great place to work. we need your help to kind of connect the dots here and find some employees from your brands. Or I work with a gentleman who's sold, 7-figure deals in minor league baseball, and he'll sell like a 6-figure sponsorship to a toll company in Dallas, because they're increasing their rates, or because they have a new road that has a toll, or whatever it might be. Again, it's kind of whatever is that objective of the sponsorship side of thing. How can the team or the league help tell that story and gain those new fans for you?
So what's interesting about that is that the teams and the leagues get engaged in a real strategic way, not only with brands, but with other business ventures. We have a PDMI friendly, they're going to be presenting at the next PDMI East, and I believe they're not a member and a sponsor, and they're called Flow Code. And Flow Code has actually worked out arrangements with the NBA, with MLB, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with a lot of other specific sports teams, because they're able to take these huge, massive QR codes and create instant calls to action between the fan and the moment. So I think they've done a lot of QR codes for the NCAA and the like, and they did a huge 40-foot one for the NBA. It was just massive.
Yep.
But it's a way in which now leagues and individual teams are getting in the action with this brand engagement.
Absolutely. And I think, so you mentioned the agency I work with and stuff. I think probably 95% of the campaigns we work on with teams and leagues right now include QR codes, because it's almost like we've gone back to them again now, like now that we use it on menus and everywhere else we go. It definitely is, that's one marketing technique that certainly is used a lot in sports, and you'll see it on OTT platforms, streaming ads. I mean, you see it kind of everywhere now. So definitely you're right on there.
Well, and what's interesting is that you have this marketing aspect in the sports industry, but you also have the sales aspect, right? Because yes, you cut these big sponsorship deals, but you also have to sell them. You also have to sell luxury seats. You also have to sell season tickets. And so aligning sales and marketing, while it's crucial for any brand marketer and any business, it's even more so crucial, I think, in the sports marketing arena. Can you give us a good example where you had that good alignment of the marketing and sales, or better yet, even examples where you had to adjust the training so that sales could be in better alignment with the marketing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. So real quick, so my background I started in Las Vegas, actually, from minor league baseball team in Vegas. We were called the 51s back in the day. It's now the Las Vegas Aviators. And I spent 9 years in the National Hockey League with the Minnesota Wild. And then actually got out of sports for a little while and worked at Target Corporation, working on Target.com, Target Mobile, Target Social, and then kind of went back into the sports space. And so during that time, I kind of thought a lot about this type of question of like being in the team side, but then being more on like the agency side now. Like, what does that look like? And the one thing that's interesting on the sports side is each year sales cycle is very cyclical. It's a very seasonal sales calendar. And so my background is mostly in ticket sales. And so what I mean by that is you've got, you go through your renewal standpoint. So let's say basketball and hockey right now, for example, they're coming to a wrap up, but they're reaching the playoffs soon. But all of those NBA and NHL teams, for example, are going through their renewal process for next year's tickets. So you've started that process. Once you get through the playoffs and renewals and things there, then you start putting your single game or your season tickets and your plan packages on sale. And then once that follows, then you got your group tickets on sale. Then you got your single game tickets on sale. So every year kind of follows this plan. However, where the wrinkles start to happen is, what does that season then look like from a fan perspective? And what I mean by that, so my first year with the Wild, we went to the Western Conference Finals, which was unbelievable. We made it to basically the final 4 teams of the NHL. A couple of years later, you fast forward, we had a work stoppage. So then we're literally out of business. After that, we had the All-Star game. We had our best player would hold out. So every year has got these highs and lows of roller coasters of what's happening in kind of the player world. What does the team look like? And then also what's happening in the fan universe, and what's your market look like, for example. So we have, 5 professional teams here, plus, Division I schools and everything else in this market. California is no different. New York's no different. Like, everywhere has got that competition for the fan dollar. So how does the team kind of ride those highs and lows kind of through that seasonal calendar and really be able to make an impact on the revenue side from that perspective?
Yeah, and we experienced that here in San Diego significantly with the competition for the fan dollar. It's not just sports events, but it's everything that you have to do in San Diego.
Mhm.
So the fact that we're getting an MLS team is great. We did lose our Chargers and we have our Padres, but it's a tough environment where, to have the draw to bring people into the seats to take that time and money away from something else. And I guess maybe I'd like to lead into one question about that is, we know that sports marketing is so much about fan engagement and loyalty and kind of creating that community of culture between the team and the city and the community that they're in. What, now that you've been on the team side, but also in a company like Target, what can consumer brand marketers learn from sports marketers about that kind of engagement and about creating community?
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to it earlier too a little bit, but when you think back, like which teams am I a fan of, or how did I become that fan? It really starts at a young age, and so that's part of it. Is for a lot of brands, I think it's just like it's that diehard fandom and that allegiance that sports has, and it's other brands can have it certainly, but it's hard to have that. Like, how do you get somebody kind of wearing that badge of honor and putting on the jersey or the kit and wearing that around proudly and being something they want to wear? And you think of, like, again, I mentioned earlier, I'm a Vikings fan, but it's years and years of misery, to be honest with you. But I still go to tickets and I still watch every game and I'm still there rooting for my team, even though at the end of the day I kind of already feel like I might know what might be happening. So I think that's where it's like, do brands all have that? Do they have that second chance on a yearly basis? Hard to say. But I think certain brands, again, you mentioned Target. I mean, the guest experience of Target is something that is hard to match for a lot of brands, and so we did have that at the Target side too, where I kind of got to step into it and see that loyalty and that guest experience that was happening at Target at that level. And so myself at Target, I was on the grocery side, so I worked with like Unilever, Kraft, Kellogg's, General Mills, some large brands. And as they would launch new products and new opportunities, we'd bring those to the guests of Target online. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting and tricky question to answer.
Right.
But hopefully I gave you a little insights there, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think that you touched on the idea of starting young. And one thing that I think brands can learn from sports teams is a sense of generational loyalty, right? So my wife buys Coach bags. She loves Coach bags. She keeps them in pristine condition, and our kids will probably get them. So as the girls grew up, they saw wearing Coach. Is that something that'll work? Maybe, maybe not. Apple's done a really nice job of creating generational loyalty as well. And so I think that when brand marketers think about how to tap into that generational loyalty and that deep engagement, I think sports teams can be a very good model. But I mean, what happens though is that as each generation changes and consumer behavior changes, the technology and the marketing is going to change too. So I'm assuming that in the sports marketing, that's no different. So what did you see as some of the new technology changes that kind of are playing out now in that industry?
Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. So I would say that one that really kind of sticks out to keep an eye on, I think, is the whole NIL, name, image, and likeness side of things in the college space. There's a lot of technologies that are kind of trying to feel that out and see what that looks like. And I think they're still trying to kind of govern that and figure out exactly how they want to operate that. But in terms of, players having the opportunity to be paid at the college level, and that's another one that I think brands are starting to play a lot more into is helping funnel dollars to recruit new types of talents and things in college. I mean, that's a whole new space. So I think that's one certainly to kind of keep an eye on. I mentioned AI earlier too. I do think that that's very interesting. We talked a lot about it at the conference in terms of how does it at the end of the day help generate warmer leads for teams, and really this is brands as well, but for teams to find those premium buyers, for example, luxury suite buyers, those kind of things that instead of having to do 100 phone calls a day and getting told no 98 times, how does AI kind of help generate that for you and kind of work with the marketing funnel to set that up a little bit easier from the sales perspective? I would say though that I've done some stuff on the ticket sales training side as well, and I think the one thing in our industry, at least, to be careful of is how not to create a lazy sales team through that, though, and just lay back and take phone calls or emails. So there's still got to be some personality put into it from the sales side of things, but I do think AI has a ton of upside and benefit that we can look at there. Player performance is another one. There's a lot of apps and abilities out there. The one interesting thing on the sports side is I personally feel like a lot of the technologies are somewhat behind in sports on the business side. But when you're looking at the player performance and athlete side, it's always advanced. It's years ahead a lot of times there, because a lot of times the teams will funnel dollars into the talent and the athlete side of things. But when you're looking at the business side, budgets are much more defined. I mean, obviously pros have a little bit more budget than a minor league team, obviously, but staff sizes are different, budgets are different. So a lot of times the technologies will then follow suit and be somewhat behind the times on the business side. So that's kind of one interesting piece that I've seen there over the years. But sports betting obviously just continues to explode state to state. So we're seeing a lot of things there. And then the other piece that I would say is the immersive fan experiences technology space, I think, is another big one. One piece there that I saw that was at the National Sports Forum is there was some people from the Major League Baseball talking, and they were talking about facial recognition and how that'll become your new ticket into the stadium. And right away, your guard kind of goes up like, "Ooh, I don't know if that's the thing we'd want." But the way they're doing it, the way they're handling it, it was very interesting. They showed actually one video of a stadium where they circled somebody with a normal ticket going in through the gates and security and everything, and then they circled another person that used facial recognition that came from way behind them, and they caught up at the gates and they passed them through. So they got through even faster, even with their family members. So it basically saw their face and it knew you have 3 other tickets with you. All 4 of you get through and you're in within seconds, if not minutes. So those types of technologies, I think, are really going to kind of help that experience of, I no longer have to wait in line for that, or I don't need, that just everything's sped up so you can be in your seat or with your friends watching the game.
That's fantastic. That's very interesting insight. I love that. I mean, I remember going to the Padres game last summer, and you file in and you stand in line, and suddenly you've got 30,000 people going into a handful of lines one at a time. It's kind of antiquated now that you think about it.
It is, yep.
That was fantastic insight. We're already 25 minutes past the hour, Michael. This is excellent. So I'm going to ask JY if we've got some questions from the audience for Michael Brinkman.
Hey, Chris, we actually do. We'll have time for maybe 1 or 2. So let's get started. There's a lot of buzz that the Women's March Madness tournament this year is better appointment viewing than the men's tournament. What do you think the next 12 to 18 months holds for the expansion of women's sports and marketing opportunities around it?
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit about that earlier, but I kind of tend to agree. I mean, I mentioned that tournament here in Minnesota. I mean, the men's tournament was behind in attendance from the women's tournament overall for those games. And I think just the leagues in general, we mentioned the PWHL, obviously the National Women's Soccer League you mentioned, Chris. I think there's, as the Olympics come up, I mean, a lot of that viewing is going to be centered around the women's games as well. So I think it's just going to continue to expand in terms of the opportunities that are there. I have a young daughter myself, and when we were at the women's hockey game, it was just it almost gave me goosebumps as a dad, to be honest, just kind of thinking about like, this is finally her opportunity. Like for years, she was asking me like, "Dad, what, like you watch games on TV, but where's the women's games? Like, how do we watch that? What channel do I tune into?" And for years, there wasn't an answer, to be honest with you. And so now, like for her to be able to sit there and watch a game where she could eventually be on that stage, it means a lot to her. It means a lot to me as a dad, and I think that is only going to open up doors, as we go here.
Michael, that's a great.
It's a great answer, and I have to believe that that will only continue to grow. 50% of the population are ladies, and we know that there's a hunger for finding women on the sports teams and watching that professional level. And one thing that I saw with the San Diego Wave is that they can't keep up with the demand. It's just packed. and it's entire families that go, not
Yep.
just one people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great feedback, guys. Let's get another question in here if we can. Would you care to share what has been the biggest challenge or change you've experienced in sports marketing industry over the last 2 years, and how did you manage through it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it is. I mean, it's going back to the technology side of things because things are moving so rapidly. And like I mentioned, it's whether or not those budgets are meeting the rapid technology changes. So, one of the other things that they talked about at National Sports Forum is teams really take a hard look at their tech stacks. So they try to decide, okay, what is this new product you're talking to me about? Is that something we can already do in our existing tech stack? Or is this new? And if it is new, how relevant is it? How much will it help us? And so can we add that to our budget, or do we add that in? Or is it something that we can maybe replace over here because we don't need it in this tech part of our tech stack? So I think that's kind of the evolving over the past couple of years, is like that jostling of a variety of different technologies and solutions that are out there, and whether or not the teams and the leagues are able to use those to generate more revenue, basically, at the end of the day.
That's another good one. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that. Let's do one more. Kind of put your best prediction hat on here. Do you have one big prediction for the state of sports marketing over the next year?
State of sports marketing. Yeah, so the other thing that I haven't really touched on, but sports marketing in general is also very unique from we talked a little bit about the market sizes, but each team too is, again, just so unique in each market. I mean, we can do some different things with multiple teams in one market, and it might work for one and it doesn't necessarily work for another. So based on the types of targeting and fans you're trying to reach, the types of messaging that you're going out with, it's interesting how, like, in each market that can be different. So I think that's what makes it tricky to answer that question, actually, is like sports marketing in general is so fluid in terms of what works and what doesn't work. I do think, going all the way back to what Chris was saying, though, is the TV viewership, and now what we see with the streaming viewership. You look at, like, I'll use National Lacrosse League as an example, Chris. You've got the Seals there in San Diego. I don't know if you've been to a game, but I spent some time in the National Lacrosse League. It's a fantastic sport, but you can watch all of those games on ESPN Plus. And so, like, if you have some of this capability to watch, you have so many options and choices. So, like, how does that evolve, and what is ESPN? I think they said today again is kind of up for bids. So what will eventually happen to ESPN is going to trickle down to all of the rest of sports marketing, and what is that viewership, and then in turn ticket sales revenue, sponsorship revenue, merchandise revenue, concession revenue, and all of that going to look like.
Nicely said, nicely done. I'm going to come back in and join you guys to close things out here. Honestly, Michael, Chris, phenomenal session. What a great conversation today. Thank you. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. Before we close out, I'd like to take a moment to invite you all to join us for our next episode of PDMI Take 20, hosted Wednesday, April 3rd, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'd also like to remind you that the PDMI Spring Conference, PDMI East, is scheduled for April 8th through 10 in Miami at the Eden Rock Hotel. There's no better way to support the PDMI events than by purchasing your attendee badges and staying on site at the host hotel. To get your attendee badges and your hotel rooms, please visit thepdmi.com. That's thepdmi.com. Thanks again, everyone, and make it a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.